Thanksgiving was always supposed to mean warmth, gratitude, and family gathered as one. At least that's what I believed. But one cruel remark from my daughter-in-law shattered that belief forever. Even now, when I remember her words, I can still feel the sting. It wasn't just about a holiday dinner. It was about my place in their world, a world where suddenly I no longer belonged. But what happens when a mother is pushed too far? When her heart breaks, yet she finds the strength to rise again? This is my story, a story I never expected to live through, but one I know many of you will understand. If you've ever felt left out, forgotten, or cast aside by the very people you loved most, stay with me. Because what came after that Thanksgiving night changed everything. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 72 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a wooden house by the lake in Vermont. People often call it a cabin, but to me it's always been more than just a house. It's where my life unfolded, where I built dreams with my husband, where I raised my son, and where I now spend most of my days with only 2 cats for company. Most mornings start the same way. I wake up before sunrise when the world is still quiet. My bones ache sometimes, but routine pulls me up. I slip into my slippers, put the kettle on, and I'm greeted by Milo and Pearl, my companions now that Henry is gone and Michael has his own family. Milo is a mischievous tabby, always darting under my feet, while Pearl, pure white and calm, simply watches me with steady eyes, as if she understands everything I don't say out loud. "Morning, my darlings," I whisper as I fill their bowls. They purr in reply, and in this silence, even their small voices make me feel less alone. I pour hot water over my tea leaves, wait for the steam to rise, and take my cup to the large window facing the lake. At that hour, Lake Champlain is covered in mist, a silver veil stretching over dark water. The trees on the other shore are just shadows, bare now that winter has stripped them of their leaves. Sometimes, as I sit with my tea, I feel like time slows down out there. The world is still, holding its breath, and all I can hear is the faint creak of the wooden beams around me, the sound of this old house reminding me it's still alive. This house has been alive for decades. I remember the very first time Henry brought me to this lake. He was an engineer, practical, with hands rough from years of work, but always dreaming bigger than I could imagine. I was a music teacher back then, teaching high school students, saving what little I earned for small joys. He had this vision of building us a home by the lake, a place we could grow old together. At first, I thought he was teasing me. We didn't have money for grand dreams. But Henry showed me sketches he had drawn on old paper, plans for a house that was simple, strong, and ours. Within a year, he started building. I remember us sanding floors late into the night, our backs aching, paint on our hands, but laughter in our voices. The day we moved in, it didn't feel like just a house. It felt like a promise that no matter what happened outside these walls, here we would be safe, together. The walls of this home have witnessed everything. They've held our laughter, our arguments, the music I played for my students when I gave lessons here in the evenings. They've heard Henry's quiet humming as he worked on his projects, and later his labored breathing as illness began to steal him from me. Even now, years after his passing, I still feel him here. If there is one object that holds all of those memories tighter than the walls, it's the piano. That old upright piano sits by the fireplace in my living room. We bought it secondhand at an estate sale, scratched out of tune, missing a leg on the bench. I remember Henry rolling his eyes at me. "Evelyn, do you know how heavy this thing is?" But he couldn't say no to me. He fixed it up, polished the wood, even built a new bench. That piano became the heartbeat of our home. On quiet nights, I would play Chopin or Debussy, and Henry would sit with his eyes closed, smiling. Sometimes I played ragtime just to make him laugh. I taught countless students on that piano, watched them stumble, grow, and find their voices. And when Henry died, it was on that piano that I let my grief spill out, note after note, because words failed me. Even now, I touch the keys every morning. Some days I play, some days I simply let my fingers rest on them, as if the wood could still carry his warmth. It's more than an instrument. It's a memory carved into sound and silence. But here's the truth. What Henry and I built together, this house, this piano, this life, it's no longer seen as love by the people who should value it most. To my son Michael and his wife Clara, it's just property. They don't see the nights Henry and I spent working until our hands blistered. They don't hear the music that filled these walls. They only see inheritance, a prize, something to be taken when I'm gone. And as I sip my tea by the window, watching the mist pull back from the lake, I feel a heaviness in my chest. Because I know what's coming. I never thought I would live to see the day when the house that had been my heaven would become a battlefield. A battlefield with my own son standing on the other side. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. It wasn't about presents or money. It was about food on the table, laughter in the room, and the comfort of knowing that family was close. Even after Henry passed, I still tried to keep that tradition alive. I would roast a small turkey just for myself, invite a few neighbors or old friends, and fill the air with the smell of cinnamon, pumpkin pie, and wood smoke from the fireplace. So when Michael called me that year, inviting me to spend Thanksgiving with him and Clara at her family's home, my heart swelled. For a moment, I felt seen again. I imagined sitting beside him, maybe helping carve the turkey like I used to. I told myself that Clara had finally warmed up to me, that maybe this year would be different. I even ironed my best dress and pulled out the necklace Henry gave me on our 40th anniversary. But from the moment I stepped through the Whitmores' tall double doors, I knew I didn't belong. The house was nothing like mine. Where my wooden beams creak with age, their ceilings stretched high with polished chandeliers hanging down. The long dining table gleamed with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, every place setting perfect, as if torn from a magazine. The smell of roasted meats and fine wine filled the air, but it didn't smell like home. It smelled like something rehearsed, like a show. Clara greeted me with that smile of hers, polite, cold, sharp around the edges. "Evelyn," she said, leaning in just close enough for her perfume to overwhelm me. "So glad you could make it." Her voice carried no warmth. It felt more like an obligation than an invitation. The family gathered in small clusters, talking about business trips, ski vacations, and investments. I tried to follow along, but their world was not mine. I had spent my life teaching music, saving every penny, cooking meals with my own hands. I didn't know the language of hedge funds or luxury resorts. I stood there with my cup of cider, nodding politely, feeling more like a stranger than a guest. It was during dinner, when the turkey had been carved and the laughter grew louder, that Clara struck. She leaned toward me across the table, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear, yet soft enough to sound casual. "Thanksgiving in the Whitmore family is a little different," she said, her smile never wavering. "I'm afraid you might feel out of place here, Evelyn. All this is not really your kind of setting, is it?" The words slipped into me like a blade. I froze, the fork trembling in my hand. I glanced at Michael, praying he would say something, anything, to defend me, but he kept his eyes down, focused on his plate, his lips pressed tight. That silence was louder than Clara's remark. It was heavier. It was betrayal. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but food turned to ash in my mouth. I forced a smile, the kind you wear when you don't want people to see you break. "I suppose you're right," I said softly, though my voice cracked. Inside, my heart splintered. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. I barely heard the conversations around me. I just sat there, staring at the flickering candles, feeling smaller with each passing minute. When dessert came, a golden pumpkin pie with whipped cream piled high, I couldn't take a single bite. My appetite was gone. As the family laughed and clinked their glasses, I realized I had never felt lonelier in my life. Not even the night I buried Henry, because that night at least my son held my hand. Tonight he couldn't even look at me. When dinner ended, Clara kissed everyone on the cheek, her smile sharp as ever. She didn't hug me. Michael walked me to the door, his steps heavy, his face unreadable. I waited for him to say something, an apology, an explanation, even just, "I love you." But he said nothing. He only muttered, "Drive safe, Mom," before closing the door behind me. The cold November air hit me harder than I expected. I stood there on the Whitmore's stone porch, clutching my coat around me, staring out at their manicured lawn, glowing under soft garden lights. I felt like a visitor in my own son's life. No, worse than a visitor. An inconvenience. When I finally drove back to my house by the lake, the silence was deafening. Milo and Pearl met me at the door, their small bodies pressing against my legs, reminding me that at least someone was glad I had come home. I sank into my chair by the window, the mist now thicker on the water, and let the tears come. But even as I cried, a bitter truth settled over me. My son had chosen his place in Clara's world, and in doing so, he had left no place for me. I had lost my seat at his table, and perhaps I had lost my son too. My son chose another family, and I no longer have a seat at the table. When I finally got home that Thanksgiving night, the house felt colder than it had in years. I lit the fireplace the way I always do, hoping the flames would bring warmth, but the heat never reached the ache in my chest. The crackle of burning wood was the only sound in the room, and instead of comforting me, it reminded me just how empty this house had become. I sat in my chair by the window, staring at the lake through the glass. Mist curled low over the water, and the night pressed heavy against the windows. Milo hopped into my lap, Pearl curled at my feet, but even their small warmth wasn't enough. That evening should have been filled with laughter and family. Instead, all I had was silence and the echo of my daughter-in-law's words replaying in my head. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the phone rang. The sound startled me. I hadn't expected anyone to call. It was Grace Miller, my neighbor and dearest friend. Her voice was warm, concerned. "Evelyn, I heard you didn't stay at the Whitmores long. I can't stand the thought of you sitting there alone tonight. I'm coming over." I tried to protest, saying I'd be fine, but before I could finish, she hung up. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Grace stood there with her arms full of grocery bags and a smile that carried more comfort than any fire could. And beside her was Helen Foster, my old college friend, her gray hair tucked under a knitted hat, her eyes shining even in the dim light. "We couldn't let you spend Thanksgiving like this," Grace said, stepping inside as though the house were her own. Helen followed, carrying a covered dish that smelled of roasted chicken and herbs. "I brought what I had at home," she said with a grin. "It's not turkey, but it'll do." Before I knew it, the three of us were in the kitchen. Grace unpacked vegetables, Helen unwrapped her chicken, and I put the kettle back on. The air began to fill with scents of garlic and rosemary, and the clatter of pots and pans softened the heaviness inside me. For the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. As we cooked, the stories began to spill out. Grace leaned against the counter, chopping carrots with surprising vigor for someone her age. "You know," she said, "my daughter didn't even invite me to her wedding. She said it would be too complicated having me there. Imagine that. Your only child, marrying without you by her side? I thought my heart would break that day." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on, her knife steady. But then I realized, if she could cast me aside so easily, maybe she didn't value me the way I thought. It still hurts, but I've learned to make peace with it. Family isn't always who shares your blood. Helen nodded, stirring a pot on the stove. "She's right, my own son barely calls. I used to play piano with him when he was a boy. He loved it. But now, months go by without a word. When I call, he tells me he's too busy. Sometimes I wonder if I ever mattered to him at all." She paused, her eyes meeting mine. "But Evelyn, you matter to us. Don't forget that." I felt my throat tighten. Listening to them, I realized their pain mirrored mine. Different stories, same wounds. Children we raised with love, now turning away as if our presence was inconvenient. We sat down together at the small dining table, the chicken steaming in the center, bowls of vegetables scattered around, candles flickering low. It wasn't a grand Thanksgiving feast like the Whitmores. There were no crystal glasses, no chandeliers, no polished silver, but it felt real, honest. Every bite carried comfort, every laugh carried healing. We talked long into the night. Grace teased Helen about her old college crushes. Helen told us stories of her piano recitals, and I shared memories of Henry sanding the floors late into the night, his hands covered in sawdust, his smile full of pride. The three of us laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks, not from sadness, but from the relief of knowing we weren't alone in our loneliness. At one point, Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Evelyn," she said softly, "you have given enough to people who don't see your worth. Don't waste any more tears on them. Tonight you are with the people who do." Her words pierced me in a way Clara's cruelty never could, because they were true. When the night wound down and the dishes were washed, Grace and Helen hugged me tightly before leaving. "We'll do this again soon," Grace promised. "No matter what happens with Michael, you've got us." I closed the door behind them, the house quiet once more, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. Not the crushing silence of rejection, but the soft stillness of comfort after being reminded that I wasn't entirely forgotten. As I sat back down by the fire, Milo and Pearl curling against me, I whispered to myself the lesson the night had given me. For the first time in 72 years, I understood. Family is not just the people you share blood with. Family is the people who choose to keep you in their lives, who make space for you at their table, even when others push you away. For the first time in my life, I realized that family isn't just bound by blood. It's made of the people who still value your presence. After Grace and Helen left that night, the house was quiet again, But this time, the silence wasn't quite as heavy. Their words stayed with me, echoing louder than Clara's cruelty. You've given enough to people who don't see your worth. Don't waste any more tears on them. I sat by the fire long after the embers had started to fade, my mind racing. For years, I had told myself that everything I had would one day belong to Michael. The house, the land, even the piano. It was all supposed to be his. That was how I showed my love, how I kept Henry's legacy alive. But that night, I began to wonder if I had been wrong all along. I stood, walked slowly to my study, and opened the old wooden drawer where I kept my important papers. There it was, my will, yellowed slightly with age, signed years ago. I unfolded it carefully, staring at the words written in black ink. I, Evelyn Carter, leave the property located at Lake Champlain, including the residence and all its contents, to my son, Michael Carter. I traced the letters with my finger, my chest tightening. Once those words had felt right. They had felt like love, like duty. But now, reading them after what happened at the Whitmores, they felt like betrayal, but not from him. From me. I realized I had been betraying myself by handing everything over to someone who no longer valued me, someone who couldn't even find the courage to look at me while his wife pushed me out of his world. Tears blurred my vision as I picked up a pen. My hands trembled, but the decision burned clear in my chest. Slowly, I began to write a note on a fresh sheet of paper, just a rough draft, but enough to make my intentions real. This house and its contents are not to be left automatically to Michael Carter. The final decision will reflect my wishes, not expectations forced upon me. My writing was shaky, the lines uneven, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my own life. I wasn't just waiting for the world to decide my fate. I folded the old will, placed it back in the drawer, and set my new note right on top of it, weighted down with a small photo of Henry and me in our younger days. Standing proudly in front of the half-finished house, sawdust in his hair, joy in our smiles. I wanted Henry to witness this choice, to remind me why I was doing it. As I sat back, my chest rose and fell with both fear and relief. It was a terrifying thing, rewriting your own future. But it was also freeing. I didn't know then that this simple act, a note written in the quiet of my living room, would spark something much bigger. That it would lead me into a battle I never imagined fighting. At that moment, I only knew one thing. I couldn't let my son and his wife take away the last piece of myself I had left. That decision, I didn't know then, would lead me into a courtroom, standing against my own son. The morning after I wrote that note, I knew I needed to make it official. A draft tucked in my drawer wasn't enough. If I wanted to protect this house, I needed a lawyer I could trust to update my will properly. And in my mind, there was only one man for the job, Harold Blake. Harold had been my lawyer for nearly 30 years. He had handled everything for Henry and me, from buying the property to filing taxes. When Henry passed, Harold was the one who helped me sort through the mountain of paperwork, speaking gently when grief made me clumsy. He'd even been to our house for dinners more times than I could count. To me, Harold wasn't just a lawyer, he was a friend. So I called his office and scheduled an appointment. His secretary's voice was polite but oddly stiff, not the usual warmth I was used to. I brushed it off as nothing. People have off days. That afternoon I drove into town. The leaves were gone from the trees now, leaving their branches bare against the pale sky. I parked outside Harold's office, a red brick building with white shutters I'd walked into dozens of times. It should have felt familiar, safe. But as I stepped inside, something felt off. Harold greeted me in the lobby, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He shook my hand too quickly, as if he wanted to get it over with. "Evelyn," he said, "so good to see you." "It's been a while," I answered, trying to ease the tension, but the warmth I expected wasn't there. His office, usually filled with the hum of easy conversation, felt colder than the November air outside. We sat down across from each other, and I pulled out my note. "Harold," I began, my voice steady but my heart racing, "I want to change my will. I don't want the house to automatically go to Michael anymore." For a moment, Harold didn't respond. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and shuffled papers on his desk that didn't need shuffling. "Evelyn," he finally said, his tone measured, "are you sure this is something you want to do? You've always intended the house for Michael. It's what Henry would have wanted, isn't it?" My chest tightened. "Don't tell me what Henry would have wanted," I snapped before I could stop myself. I knew my husband better than anyone, and he wanted me to be respected. Michael hasn't respected me. Neither has Clara. Harold leaned back, his chair creaking. He didn't meet my eyes. Families go through rough times. Perhaps you're just upset after the holiday. Emotions can cloud judgment. Something in his voice made me freeze. It wasn't just hesitation, it was dismissal, as if my feelings didn't matter, as if he'd already chosen a side. "Harold," I said slowly, "why are you discouraging me from this? You're my lawyer. Your job is to carry out my wishes, not question them." He fiddled with his pen, his hands restless. I think Michael has your best interests at heart. He's your only son. You wouldn't want to make a decision you regret?" The words landed like a stone in my stomach. My pulse quickened as realization dawned. "You've spoken to him, haven't you?" Harold finally looked up, but his eyes darted away just as quickly. "Michael came to see me," he admitted quietly. "He was worried about you. He said you've been under a lot of stress, that you might not be thinking clearly." I felt my face burn with anger. "So he convinced you I'm losing my mind? That I can't make decisions for myself?" Harold raised his hand slightly, as if to calm me. "Evelyn, that's not what I'm saying. No," I cut him off. My voice shook, but it was sharp enough to make him flinch. "You were supposed to protect me, Harold. I trusted you. And instead, you let my son whisper lies in your ear. Do you know what that feels like? To be betrayed by your own blood and then by the one man I thought I could rely on?" Harold's shoulders sagged. He couldn't look at me. His pen rolled out of his hand and onto the desk. For once, the man who always had words, always had advice, was silent. I leaned forward, my hands trembling against the edge of his desk. "I'm 72, Harold, not senile. I know exactly what I'm doing. And what I want is for my will to reflect my wishes. Not Michael's, not Clara's. Mine. Do you understand?" He swallowed hard. His lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but no sound came out. He only nodded faintly, his gaze fixed on the floor. The office felt suffocating. I pushed my chair back and stood. "I thought you were better than this," I said quietly. "I thought you had honor." Harold's face flushed, but he still couldn't look me in the eye. I turned and walked out without another word. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel of my car. For a long moment, I just sat there in the parking lot, staring at the familiar building that suddenly felt foreign. It wasn't just Clara or Michael anymore. It wasn't just their cruelty. Now even Harold, the man who had handled every important matter in my life for decades, had chosen to stand against me. The drive home was a blur. My chest ached, not just with anger, but with something worse. Disbelief. Because when trust is broken by strangers, it hurts. But when trust is broken by those you've leaned on for years, it cuts deeper than words can ever describe. When I finally stepped into my house, I sank into my chair by the piano. My reflection in its glossy wood looked older, lonelier than ever before, and the thought struck me like ice. If Harold had turned, who else would? Who else would betray me to please my son? Even the one man I trusted most had turned his back on me. It was 2 nights after my meeting with Harold. I had barely slept since then, my mind spinning like a wheel that refused to stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's downcast gaze, the shame that told me more than his words ever could. He had betrayed me, and worse, he had done it in Michael's name. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames, but feeling nothing. Milo was curled on the armrest beside me, Pearl asleep on the rug. The phone sat on the table, silent. I almost wished it would stay that way forever. But then it rang. I hesitated before answering. My heart already knew who it was. "Mom?" It was Michael. His voice was steady, but underneath I heard the tension, the kind of tightness that comes from rehearsing an argument in your head. "Yes," I answered. My tone was flat, sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing like he was gathering himself. Then he spoke. "Mom, we need to talk about the will." My stomach turned. "Of course," I said bitterly. "That's all you care about, isn't it?" His voice hardened. "Don't do that. Don't twist this. The house isn't just yours. It's part of our family. It's meant to stay with us for the next generation. You can't just decide to change everything because you're upset." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. "Upset? Michael, do you have any idea what it feels like to be told by your wife that you don't belong at your own family's table, and then to look at your son, my son, and see him say nothing? Not a word in my defense? That's not being upset. That's being erased. Silence. A long silence. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost pleading. I didn't know what to say. Clara? She has a way of... Clara? I cut in sharply. This isn't about Clara. This is about you. You stood there, Michael, and you let it happen. You chose silence. And in that silence, you chose her. Another silence. I could imagine him pinching the bridge of his nose, the way he always did when he was frustrated. Mom, he said finally, I'm not trying to hurt you, but you're making this harder than it has to be. The house is supposed to be mine one day. You know that. It's what Dad would have wanted. My throat tightened, rage and heartbreak twisting together. Don't you dare use your father's memory against me, I said, my voice shaking. I knew him better than anyone, and he would have never wanted me to be treated like this. He built this house with me, for me. Not for you, and certainly not for your wife. Michael let out a long sigh, the kind that carries years of resentment. You're being unreasonable? You've always told me this house would be mine, and now, because of one argument, you're ready to throw that away? One argument? My laugh was bitter. This isn't about one argument, Michael. This is about respect. And you've shown me none. There was a sharp silence. Then his tone changed, colder now, steel beneath the words. If you go through with this, Mom, if you change the will, you'll regret it. I'll fight you. You'll lose. My chest tightened. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. You take me to court? I whispered. If you force me to, he said, his voice steady but hard. I won't let you do this. You're not thinking straight, and Claire and I won't stand by while you ruin everything. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words crushing me. For a moment I wanted to cry, to beg him to remember the boy I once raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, who used to sit at the piano and play clumsy notes just to make me smile. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man willing to tear apart his own mother's life for a house. When I spoke, my voice was cold, steady, the kind of tone I didn't even recognize as mine. If it's a fight you want, then that's what you'll get. I'll see you in court, Michael. There was silence again, but this one was different. Heavy. Final. I could almost hear him flinch at my words. Fine, he said at last, his voice clipped. We'll see. And then the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone humming into the emptiness. Milo meowed softly, as if sensing my heartbreak, but even that couldn't break the silence that followed. I lowered the phone, placed it on the table, and whispered to myself the truth I never thought I'd have to say. My own son had declared war on me. I answered him, steady and cold. I'll be waiting for you there. After that phone call with Michael, sleep wouldn't come. I lay awake and watched the red digits on the clock crawl from 1 hour to the next, hearing his words over and over. You'll lose. I'll take you to court. By dawn, my chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and I could not put it back. I made tea I didn't drink. I fed Milo and Pearl. I sat at the piano and set my fingers on the keys without pressing down. The house waited with me, as if it, too, knew I had to make a choice. Grace's voice from our simple Thanksgiving supper came back to me. Don't waste your tears on people who don't see your worth. If I wanted to protect what Henry and I built, I needed someone who would see my worth and fight for it. That morning, I opened a little notebook and wrote 3 sentences so I wouldn't forget why I was doing this. This is my home. I am not confused. I will not be erased. Then I drove into Burlington. The sky was a flat winter gray. The sidewalks were still wet from last night's flurries. The office I was looking for was small. One brass plaque by the door. Natalie Brooks, attorney at law. No marble lobby, no crystal lamps, just clean glass. A plant that had been watered recently, and a receptionist with kind eyes who said, Mrs. Carter, Ms. Brooks will be right with you. Natalie looked younger than I expected, about the age Michael used to be when he still called me, just to tell me about his day. Dark hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a legal pad already open. She shook my hand like she meant it. Mrs. Carter, I'm glad you came, she said. Start wherever it hurts. I'll listen. So I told her. Not in perfect order, because pain doesn't come in order. Thanksgiving at the Whitmores. Clara's smooth little knife of a sentence. Michael's eyes on his plate. Harold's downcast stare in that office I had trusted for 30 years. And finally Michael's call, hard, cold, promising a courtroom like it was a gift. Natalie didn't interrupt. She wrote notes. She asked only when my voice needed a place to rest. When I reached the end, I stared at my hands. Maybe I'm just old and stubborn, I said. Maybe letting the house go is easier than fighting my own son. She set her pen down. Easier is not the same as right, she said softly. You are competent, you are clear, and you have rights over your home, your legacy, and your peace. We will not let anyone rewrite your wishes because it benefits them. I felt something unclench in my chest. Here's how we begin, Natalie continued, voice steady, practical. First, do not sign anything they bring you. If Harold calls, don't engage. Refer him to me. I'll send a letter of representation today and request your full client file from his office. He has to provide it. I nodded. He said Michael was worried about me, that I might not be thinking clearly. That's a common tactic, she said. So we get ahead of it. I'll arrange a capacity evaluation with your primary care physician, routine, respectful, on your terms. We'll keep the report sealed unless they force the question. Meanwhile, we document your daily life. Your notes today are a good start. Keep them. Dates, times, conversations, small details matter. She flipped to a new page. Next, we prepare a new will and a simple letter to revoke any prior drafts not executed the way you want. We'll also consider a living trust for extra clarity. We'll sign with independent witnesses who don't know your son or Harold, and we'll keep originals in a safe place that isn't easily accessed. Your bank's safe deposit box is ideal. I thought of the drawer in my study and the photo of Henry holding the half-finished railing, sawdust in his hair. I can do the bank, I said. I can do witnesses. Grace will stand for me. Helen, too. Perfect, Natalie said. Finally, we secure the house. If anyone has keys you didn't give them, change the locks, save receipts. If Michael or Clara show up uninvited, you call me and, if needed, the sheriff. You don't have to manage confrontations alone. Her plan was simple the way a sturdy chair is simple, nothing fancy, and exactly what you need after you've been standing too long. Still, I worried about the money. I'm not rich, I admitted. I have the house, a small pension, some savings. I can't drown in fees. We'll be smart, she said. Flat fee for the estate work. If they force litigation, we'll talk strategy at each step so you're never surprised. And I'll be honest with you, even when it's not what you want to hear. I laughed, a short, tired sound. Honesty would be a relief. Natalie smiled. Good. One more thing. Evidence tends to hide in ordinary places. Old letters, emails, texts, even calendars. If anyone tried to alter your plans, there may be footprints. We'll ask Harold for his internal notes and time entries for meetings with Michael. If necessary, we'll subpoena. For now, gather what you can from home, without tearing your life apart. I told her I had kept nearly everything Henry and I touched. Closing papers, old appraisals, even the first sketch he drew on butcher paper. She didn't wrinkle her nose at my sentimentality. She wrote, "Keep originals, bring copies." When the meeting ended, she slid a simple retainer across the desk. You don't have to be brave alone, Mrs. Carter. We'll walk this one step at a time. If he wants a courtroom, we'll meet him there, with facts, with witnesses, and with your voice. My voice. The word startled me. Lately, my voice had felt like a thing that only moved when pushed. But sitting across from this young woman who spoke to me like I mattered, I remembered what it felt like to use my voice for something other than apology. We stood. She shook my hand. Again, firm as the first time. I'll email you a checklist by tonight, she said. Rest if you can, make tea, play something on that piano you told me about. Tomorrow, we begin. Outside, Burlington's wind came up the street fast and sharp, but it didn't bite quite as hard. I stopped at the public library to make copies. Old muscle memory from years of teaching, then drove home with a folder thick enough to feel like armor on the passenger seat. The house greeted me with its familiar creak. I changed the porch light that had been flickering for weeks. I put the kettle on for real this time, and when the whistle rose, I poured 2 cups, one for me, one for the memory of Henry, and set them both on the piano. I opened the lid and played the simplest thing I knew by heart, the first lullaby I taught Michael when his hands were small and sure, and still loved to learn from mine. My fingers shook at the start, then steadied. The notes filled the room like warm breath on cold glass. I wrote the day's date at the top of my notebook and listed everything Natalie had asked me to do. Then I wrote one more line she hadn't asked for. I am not afraid of seeing him in court if that's the road he chooses. Milo leapt onto the bench beside me. Pearl yawned from the rug. The night gathered outside the window, and for the first time in many weeks, it did not press against the glass quite so hard. I wasn't healed, not yet. But the ground under my feet felt solid again. A small, stubborn light of hope flickered inside my aging heart. A few days later, Helen came by. She carried with her that same gentle smile I remembered from college, though her steps had slowed with age. She had always been a pianist first, and everything else second. Even now, at 72, her hands carried a grace that spoke of years spent on ivory keys. "I brought you some muffins," she said, setting a basket on the kitchen counter. "Pumpkin spice. They were on sale, and I thought, why not?" We laughed, two old women laughing at simple pleasures. But behind the laughter, I knew she had come for something else. She had sensed the heaviness in my voice during our last phone call. After tea, she asked, "Do you still play?" Her eyes drifted toward the piano in the corner of the living room, its wood dulled by dust, the keys silent. I hesitated. "Not as much as I used to. It doesn't sound the same without Henry humming along." Helen rose from her chair, walked over, and slid the cover back. Dust puffed into the air. "Nonsense," she said softly. "A piano only asks to be played. It keeps secrets, but it also gives them away." I fetched a cloth, and together we wiped it down. As I polished the edges, Helen's hand paused at the side panel. "What's this?" she murmured. Her finger traced a faint line I'd never noticed before. Curious, I leaned closer. "Probably just a crack. This old thing has survived more winters than either of us." But Helen pressed gently, and to my surprise, the wood shifted. A small panel clicked open, revealing a narrow compartment no bigger than a shoebox. Inside lay an envelope, yellowed with age. My heart thudded as I pulled it out. On the front, in Henry's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Evelyn." My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, the ink slightly faded but still strong enough to read. "My dearest Evelyn, if you ever find yourself doubting your place in this house, remember this. We built it together. It belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to claim it, this home is yours. Don't let anyone take it away from you. Henry." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. I could almost hear his voice, steady and kind, the way he used to sound when he reassured me after a long day. Helen placed her hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn," she whispered, "this is more than just words. This is proof. Henry's intent, his voice, in writing. No court in the world could dismiss this." I nodded, speechless. For weeks I had felt cornered, powerless, like everything I built was slipping through my fingers. And now, out of nowhere, Henry had reached out from the past with one final gift. His words, his truth, written in his own hand. We sat there in silence, the weight of the discovery filling the room. The piano, silent for so long, had given me more than music that day. It had given me a weapon. I slipped the letter back into its envelope and placed it in a small wooden box on my desk. My fingers lingered on the lid as if sealing it wasn't just about protecting the paper, but about protecting Henry's voice. As Helen left later that afternoon, she hugged me tighter than usual. "You're not alone, Evelyn," she said. "Henry's still with you, and now, so am I." That night, as I sat by the fire, the envelope safe on the table beside me, I realized something. This fight wasn't only about my dignity anymore. It was about honoring Henry's legacy, about keeping his promise alive. I understood then that I held something far stronger than any contract: the truth. The day of the first hearing arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning when frost clings stubbornly to the ground, even after the sun comes up. I dressed carefully, my hands trembling as I buttoned the jacket I'd saved for serious occasions. My reflection in the mirror looked older than I remembered, but behind the lines on my face, I saw something else, a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. Natalie met me at the courthouse steps. She wore a dark suit, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes sharp as ever. "Ready?" she asked, her voice low, steady. "As ready as I'll ever be," I whispered. Inside, the courtroom was small, just a few rows of wooden benches. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper. I sat at the table beside Natalie, clutching the folder that held Henry's letter, though we hadn't yet decided if we would introduce it. Across the aisle sat Michael and Clara. Clara looked radiant in her tailored coat, her hair perfectly styled, Her lips curved into that confident smile that had always made me feel small. She sat tall, her hand resting lightly on Michael's arm as if she were steadying him. But in truth, she was the one leading him. Michael avoided my eyes. His face was hard, his jaw clenched, the same way Henry's used to be when he was furious. But this was different. This wasn't righteous anger. This was determination aimed at me, his own mother. The judge entered and the room rose before settling again. His voice was calm, practiced, but heavy with authority as he called the case. Clara's lawyer opened first, his words polished, rehearsed. Your Honor, this case is about a mother who is no longer able to make sound decisions. Her son, Michael Carter, has stepped in out of concern to ensure the family home is preserved and protected. My stomach twisted. Concern? Protected? They were rewriting my life with words that sounded noble but dripped with lies. Then came the witness I had dreaded most, Harold Blake. He walked to the stand with the slow confidence of a man who thought his reputation would shield him. He swore the oath, sat, and adjusted his glasses the same way he always did when speaking in his office. But this time, his words weren't for me. They were against me. I've known Mrs. Carter for decades, he began, his voice steady. But in recent months, I've observed concerning lapses in her memory. She repeated herself in meetings, seemed confused about dates, and at one point even forgot the purpose of our discussion. In my professional opinion, she may no longer have full capacity to handle complex legal matters. My breath caught in my throat. Lies. Half-truths twisted into weapons. Yes, I had repeated myself. Grief does that. Yes, I had struggled with dates. When your husband is gone and your son turns away, sometimes the days blur together. But forgetful was not incapable. I wanted to shout, to stand and scream that he was lying. But Natalie squeezed my hand under the table. Not yet, she whispered. We'll have our turn. Still, sitting there while Harold painted me as weak, confused, unstable, it cut deeper than Clara's words at Thanksgiving ever had. At least Clara's cruelty had been honest. This was betrayal cloaked in professional dignity. Michael shifted uncomfortably as Harold spoke. For a moment I thought I saw doubt flicker across his face. But then Clara leaned in, whispering something in his ear, and his jaw tightened again. He looked straight ahead, refusing to glance at me. When Harold finished, I felt hollow. The courtroom buzzed softly as papers shuffled and chairs creaked, but all I heard was Harold's voice replaying in my head. She may no longer have full capacity. The judge nodded, jotting notes. My entire identity, 72 years of living, teaching, building, loving, boiled down to one man's opinion. Natalie rose for cross-examination, her voice calm but sharp as glass. Mr. Blake, you claim Mrs. Carter repeated herself. Did you document these alleged lapses in writing at the time? Harold shifted. No, but... And when you say she seemed confused, could it be possible she was simply under emotional distress, given the circumstances she had described to you? Grief? Betrayal? Harold cleared his throat. It's possible, but... No further questions, Natalie said, her tone crisp, dismissive. She sat down beside me, whispering, We'll cut him apart piece by piece. Don't let this shake you. But it had shaken me. As the hearing recessed for lunch, I sat frozen at the table. Around me, voices rose and fell, lawyers shuffled files, the bailiff gave instructions. But all I could think was this. I was being erased. Erased from my own story, replaced by a version of myself that was weak, confused, incapable. A version created not by truth, but by the people I had once trusted most. I felt as though I was being erased from the very story of my own life. The second day of the hearing began with a chill in the air that no coat could quite chase away. I sat at the wooden table beside Natalie, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the aisle, Clara looked radiant as always, her lipstick perfect, her posture upright, as if she had already won. Michael sat stiff beside her, jaw clenched, but he couldn't quite meet my eyes. The morning passed slowly with more legal arguments and motions, but I knew Natalie was waiting for the moment she could pull the weight of truth into the light. Finally, the judge gave her the floor. Natalie stood, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, yesterday the opposing counsel presented testimony questioning my client's capacity to make decisions. Today we bring forward physical evidence that not only demonstrates her clarity of mind, but also her late husband's clear intent regarding the property in question. She held up a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside was Henry's letter, the one I had found hidden in the piano. The courtroom seemed to shift, every eye turning toward the paper as if it glowed. This, Natalie continued on, is a handwritten letter from Mr. Henry Carter, discovered recently in the family piano by Mrs. Carter and a longtime family friend, Helen Foster. It clearly states, and I quote, "No matter what happens, this home is yours, Evelyn. Don't let anyone take it away from you." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Michael's shoulders stiffened. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have handwriting verification?" "Yes, Your Honor," Natalie replied, handing over an envelope. "We've submitted exemplars of Mr. Carter's handwriting from official documents, verified by an expert. The comparison leaves no doubt this letter is authentic." The opposing lawyer rose, his voice sharp. "Objection. This is hearsay. A sentimental letter, not a legal document." Natalie didn't flinch. "Intent is central to this case, Your Honor, and this letter demonstrates intent more clearly than the claims of third parties who stand to benefit financially." She shot a glance toward Harold, who sat in the gallery, avoiding everyone's eyes. The judge tapped his pen thoughtfully. "Objection overruled. The letter will be admitted as evidence." I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath, but Natalie wasn't finished. She called Grace to the stand. Grace walked up slowly, but her presence was steady. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and then settled into the witness chair. Natalie approached gently. "Mrs. Miller, can you tell the court what you witnessed at Mrs. Carter's home?" Grace nodded. "Yes. One afternoon, a few weeks ago, I saw Clara Whitmore Carter pull into Evelyn's driveway while Evelyn was out. She wasn't alone. Harold Blake, her former lawyer, was with her. I watched from my porch. Clara unlocked the front door and led him inside. They stayed there about 20 minutes. A murmur rose again, louder this time. Natalie's voice sharpened. "Did Evelyn give Harold or Clara permission to enter her home that day?" "No," Grace said firmly. "She was with me in town at the time. I know for certain." I glanced toward Harold. His face had gone pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. Clara, however, didn't flinch. She sat taller, her chin raised, though her knuckles whitened where she gripped Michael's hand. The opposing lawyer rose again, trying to poke holes, but Grace didn't waver. "I know what I saw," she repeated. "Clara had no right to be in that house." When Grace stepped down, Natalie leaned close to me and whispered, "We've got them rattled." I dared to look across the aisle. Michael's hands trembled slightly against the table. Clara noticed and placed her hand over his, steadying him, though her smile had vanished. Her jaw was tight, her composure cracking at the edges. The judge called for order, his gavel sharp against the desk, but nothing could quiet the shift in the room. Everyone had seen it, the letter, the testimony, the unease radiating from Michael, the brittle calm Clara fought to maintain. For the first time in that courtroom, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Michael's hands trembled while Clara forced herself to remain composed. The courtroom had grown heavier with every passing hour. The letter from Henry, Grace's testimony, the whispers that followed, everything was building towards something none of us could quite name. Even Clara's perfect smile had begun to look strained, like porcelain about to crack. And then the judge turned his attention to Harold. "Mr. Blake," the judge said sternly, "you've testified regarding Mrs. Carter's state of mind. However, there have been troubling claims that raise questions about your credibility. I am ordering you to return to the stand." Harold stiffened. He glanced at Clara, who gave him the smallest of nods, but I saw the panic flicker in his eyes. Slowly, he rose and walked back to the witness chair. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses. The judge's voice was sharp. "Mr. Blake, did you at any point enter Mrs. Carter's home without her knowledge or consent?" Harold hesitated. Too long. The silence spread like wildfire. I may have entered at Clara's request," he muttered. "Answer clearly," the judge demanded. Harold's voice cracked. "Yes, I went with her. She said Evelyn would want me to look over certain documents, that it would make things easier later." The room erupted. Gasps filled the air. The opposing lawyer leapt to his feet, shouting, "Objection!" But the judge silenced him with a glare. Natalie stood, her voice precise, cutting. "Mr. Blake, were you compensated in any way for your cooperation?" Harold's face turned crimson. He shifted in his chair, sweat beading at his temple. Clara offered financial support. She said it was to cover my time, but..." His voice faltered. He bowed his head. "Yes, She paid me. To alter the paperwork. To undermine Evelyn. For a heartbeat, the courtroom froze. The truth hung there, raw, undeniable. Then everything exploded. Clara shot up from her chair, her voice slicing through the silence. "Liar! You spineless coward!" Her mask of composure shattered, fury twisting her features. She pointed at Harold as though her finger alone could burn him to ash. Michael stared at her, stunned. "Clara, what?" His voice cracked louder than I'd heard it in years. "You said this was for us," Clara hissed, ignoring him, her eyes blazing. "You promised he would never break." The bailiff stepped forward, urging her to sit down, but the damage was done. The room had seen it, the fury, the desperation, the slip of truth in her own words. Harold slumped in the witness chair, defeated. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he whispered, though he didn't dare look at me. "I should never have." But his apology was drowned out by Clara's rage and Michael's confusion. I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my heart pounding not with fear but with something colder. I looked at my son. His face was pale, his eyes wide, searching Clara's for answers that would not come. For a moment I thought I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who used to run to me after school, the boy who once played the piano clumsily just to make me laugh. But then his gaze flicked toward me, and it was empty, hollow, as if all that was left inside him was an echo of what Clara had built. I looked at my son, and his eyes were hollow. I no longer knew how much of the real Michael was left inside. The final day of the hearing came faster than I expected. By then, the courtroom felt less like a place of law and more like a battlefield where every word, every glance, carried the weight of a weapon. My heart pounded as the judge returned, his expression unreadable, his robe sweeping as he sat down. "All rise." The silence that followed was suffocating. He shuffled a stack of papers, cleared his throat, and began. "This court has reviewed the testimony and the evidence presented over the past sessions. We have heard claims regarding Mrs. Carter's capacity, allegations of undue influence, and challenges to the integrity of her estate planning." Clara sat tall, her chin lifted, though her hand gripped Michael's arm so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Michael's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the judge, unblinking. The judge continued, "It is clear that attempts were made to alter Mrs. Carter's will and estate documents without her consent. Testimony from Mr. Blake confirms financial inducement and misconduct. Furthermore, the handwritten letter from the late Mr. Henry Carter provides compelling evidence of his intent, that this home belongs to his wife, Evelyn Carter, for the duration of her life, without interference." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the air felt frozen in place. The judge raised his gaze. "Therefore, this court rules. All unauthorized amendments are hereby void. Mrs. Evelyn Carter retains sole ownership of her home. No further claims by Mr. Michael Carter or Mrs. Clara Whitmore Carter shall be recognized regarding the property." The gavel struck. Sharp. Final. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The sound echoed like thunder in my chest, and yet, instead of triumph, all I felt was the fragile release of a held breath, the loosening of a weight that had pressed me down for months. Across the aisle, Clara's composure shattered. Her face twisted in fury as she grabbed her bag, whispering sharply into Michael's ear. Michael sat frozen, staring blankly at the floor. When he finally rose, he didn't look at me, not once. Together they left, Clara storming ahead, Michael trailing behind like a shadow. Natalie touched my hand gently. "We won," she whispered. I nodded, but there was no smile on my face. No rush of victory, only the hollow, quiet knowledge that I had kept what was mine. My house. My husband's promise. My dignity. As the courtroom emptied, I lingered for a moment, staring at the bench, the worn wooden walls, the place where my entire life had been dissected and nearly rewritten. I walked out slowly, my steps heavy but steady. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a baptism. I closed my eyes, let the wind sting my skin, and thought to myself, I wasn't happy. Not really? But I was relieved. Relieved that the battle was over. Relieved that I still had my home. Relieved that I had managed to hold on to the one piece of my soul that had not been taken. I did not feel joy. Only the weary relief of someone who had managed to hold on to the last piece of their soul. The house welcomed me back with its familiar creaks, the wooden beams whispering in the quiet as if they, too, had been holding their breath through the trial. I slipped off my coat, set down my bag, and walked slowly into the living room. The fire had gone cold, but the piano waited. silent, steadfast, a guardian of all my years. I sat down on the bench, the same bench where Henry used to nudge me aside, laughing when he wanted to play. The envelope lay on the music stand, Henry's handwriting staring back at me. I unfolded the letter once more, the paper worn now from my trembling fingers. This home is yours, Evelyn. Don't let anyone take it away. I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. The house was more than wooden nails. It was the echo of Henry's laughter when he hammered the last beam into place. It was Michael's small hands smudged with cookie dough on Thanksgiving mornings long ago. It was my own footsteps pacing late at night while I worried about bills, about lessons, about whether I had been enough. Every wall carried a memory, every window had framed moments of joy and grief. The piano, wasn't just an instrument. It was where I had lived my life in sound. The first lullaby I sang to Michael. The love songs Henry hummed, always off-key, while I tried to keep rhythm. The silence afterward, when both of them were gone from me in their own ways. Now, sitting here, I realized the house wasn't just shelter, it was freedom. It was the one place no one could strip me of my identity, no matter how hard they tried. I spoke softly into the empty room, though perhaps I was speaking to Henry, or to myself. You were right, Henry. This home was always ours. And today, I finally protected it. Not for Michael, not even for you. For me, because I am still here. The word surprised me. For months I had fought like a woman desperate to keep from drowning. Now I understood. I hadn't just been fighting for the house. I had been fighting for my right to exist, to matter, to not be erased. I rested my hands on the piano keys. They were cool to the touch. For a long moment I hesitated, and then, slowly, I pressed down. The sound filled the room, uneven at first, then steadier. Each note felt like breath returning to lungs long starved of air. The melody was nothing fancy, just the simple song Henry loved, the one I used to play on quiet evenings when the world outside seemed too loud. But tonight it sounded different, stronger. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration. The music rose into the rafters, carrying my words without needing them. I am still here. I have not been erased. I have come back to myself. The notes rang out, a declaration in music. I have returned. The weeks after the trial passed slowly, like winter days that never quite gave way to spring. The house felt different now, not heavier, not lighter, but somehow steadier. It was mine again, fully, without the shadow of lawyers or signatures pressed against me. And yet silence still lingered. I had won, yes, but the victory left scars. Some nights I caught myself staring at the phone, half expecting it to ring with Michael's voice, angry, pleading, or simply familiar. Other nights I sat at the piano playing softly and wondered if my son even remembered the songs I used to teach him. But life, as it always does, found a way to nudge me forward. It began one morning when Grace stopped by, holding a flyer in her hand. "The community center's looking for volunteers," she said. "Music lessons for kids? They don't have a teacher. You could—" She trailed off, studying my face carefully. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Grace, I'm too old to chase children around a piano bench." But that evening, I found myself staring at the flyer on my kitchen table. Something stirred inside me, a whisper of the woman I had been decades ago, the teacher who loved watching young fingers stumble through their first melody, the patient guide who believed music could be a kind of home. The next week, I walked into the community center. The walls were bright with posters and handprints, the air filled with the laughter of children. They handed me a small classroom with an upright piano scarred by years of use. I ran my hand along its keys, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Soon the room was filled with sound, not polished, not perfect, but full of life. Little hands pressed keys too hard, voices sang off pitch, but their joy was real. I found myself laughing with them, correcting gently, applauding every small triumph. And in those moments, I realized something. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who fill your life with meaning, who show up eager to learn, to grow, to share joy. In that small room, I found pieces of myself I thought had been lost forever, a new kind of family, a new reason to keep playing. It was after one of those lessons, as the last child waved goodbye, that I came home to find Michael standing on my porch. He looked thinner, older somehow, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of everything he had done finally pressed down on him. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke, his voice low, raw. "Mom, I was wrong. I let Clara poison me. I let greed poison me. And I hurt you in ways I can't take back. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say it. I'm sorry." The wind carried his words into the quiet, leaving them hanging between us like fragile glass. I didn't answer right away. I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to slam the door to keep the wall between us. Another part remembered the boy. He had once been the child who ran into my arms with laughter on his lips. After what felt like an eternity, I stepped aside and opened the door. "Come in," I said simply. His shoulders sagged with relief. He stepped inside, hesitant like a guest rather than a son. That night we sat at the table, words few and halting. He spoke of regret, of Clara leaving, of nights filled with silence. I listened, not ready to forgive, not ready to forget, but willing, at least, to hear. Later, after he left, I stood by the door, my hand lingering on the handle. I thought of the children at the piano, their laughter still echoing in my ears. I thought of Henry's letter, folded carefully in its envelope. I thought of my own reflection in the window, no longer hollow but steady. The door closed behind me slowly, its sound deep and final. No one, not even me, knew if I would ever truly forgive Michael, but that no longer defined me. Because for the first time in a long time, I was certain of one thing: I had taken back my life.